Do you know how much I make a year? I mean, even if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. Do you know what would happen if I suddenly decided to stop going into work? A business big enough that it could be listed on the NASDAQ goes belly up. Disappears. It ceases to exist without me. No, you clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in.
Walter White is a character whose intelligence supersedes that of all characters in the Breaking Bad storyline, as well as most characters in other television shows. And although his intellect is the basis for much of his creativity and abilities within chemistry, it also proves to be his downfall due to his ability to often view situations in abstract, rational, and intellectual ways. Walt's intellectual ability often leads to short-sightedness regarding his faults, since he is easily able to provide solid logic for some of his worst actions. Let's take a look at the way that Walt tends towards the defense mechanism of rationalization throughout the show. Through this form of understanding, he is unconsciously aiming at providing reasons for unacceptable actions while also disconnecting from the emotional and affective aspects connected to these actions. When he rationalizes, he gives himself the ability to detach, to provide justifications for behaviors, providing the opportunity to explain away any uncomfortable feelings that would otherwise come to the surface. With this information in mind, let's get into the analysis. Later in Season 2, Walt has become increasingly intent on making money and finding success in their meth business. When he is offered a large sum of money for his meth by Gus, he feels he has no choice but to take it. He drives to Jesse's house to break down the door while Jane and Jesse are high on drugs. During the process of rummaging through the house and finding the meth, he gets a text about the imminent birth of their daughter. But just as he trashed Jesse's apartment with no guilt, he will also drive out to the desert and miss his daughter's birth with an equally clear conscience. He has convinced himself that getting this money is of primary importance, even though he is pushing himself further away from the family for which he is committing these acts. In the next episode, Walt goes to Jesse's house and soon finds Jane choking on her own vomit, about to die from an overdose. But as we are starting to see, Walt often has his reasons and rationales for many things in life, and this time, we understand that he feels it is best for her to die, not only because Jesse is being influenced by Jane to use heroin, but primarily because she is interfering with Jesse and Walt's relationship. And as I will explain in another video, Walt needs Jesse for his own selfish needs and cannot afford to lose him to another, so Walt allows Jane to die, stuffing down his emotions, most likely considering her death the only available option. At the beginning of Season 3, we are provided one of the most glaring examples of Walt's rationalizations to this point. Following the airplane crash, which Walt knows he has had some hand in causing, we see all the students at the school talking about their feelings and expressing how devastated they are by the recent events. Even though this process is very difficult, they are allowing themselves to feel and talk about what is inside of themselves. When Walt is asked to talk, on the other hand, he does a great job of looking at things in completely abstract and intellectual terms. He says to the entire student body that things weren't that bad because
nobody on the ground was killed. And that, an incident like this over a populated urban center, that right there, that's just gotta be some minor miracle. So, plus, neither plane was full.
Soon after, he explains how
what you're left with, casualty-wise, is just the 50th worst air disaster.
He's not only rationalizing, sidestepping any potential blame or guilt that might derive from his past actions, but he is also minimizing the events, making them seem like they weren't that big of a deal. Later in the episode, he is talking to Jesse about the plane crash and eventually enters into a long-winded explanation about the problems with the air traffic controllers before ultimately saying that he blames the government. Walt is constantly going to more extreme levels to explain away circumstances in new and inventive ways. Then, at the start of Season 4, Walt is in the basement of the laundry business after Jesse has killed Gil, and Gus comes in for a silent confrontation. The entire time, Walt is talking while Gus says nothing, and so Walt needs to fill the silence with words to defend himself and his actions. He feels uncomfortable not only due to Gus's silence, but also because on a deeper level, he knows how responsible he is for the way things have gone, for the way that he has destroyed much of Gus's previously flawless operation. He starts making statements that are fairly sound, such as saying that this was the only thing he could do to save his own life. But then he goes deeper into the rationalizations by saying that
This equipment is useless without us, without Jesse and myself. You have no new product. You have no income. Your people up there will not be paid. Your distribution chain collapses. Without us, you have nothing.
here Walt is providing intellectual arguments for the current circumstances, a sort of interesting way to look at the situation, which also rids him of any blame and guilt. Not only does he seem to be doing this to make Gus second guess murdering him, but he is also needing to distance himself from the very real fear and dread that he might experience. At the end of season 4, we see 2 examples of Walt's rationalizing that display how he is going to a new and dangerous level with his psychological defenses. First, when Walt goes to see Jesse in the hospital after Gus was able to evade the planted car bomb, Walt walks into the hospital with the bomb in his bag, and Jesse asks him,
Did you just bring a bomb into a hospital?
What? Was I supposed to leave it on his car?
Even though this exchange is very brief, it shows just how deranged Walt's thinking has become and how everything seems to be explainable at this point. Then, when he goes back to his house, he is under the impression that Gus's men might be waiting for him inside, but instead of go inside himself, he asks his neighbor to check on his stove in the event that it was left on. Walt does this without blinking an eye, figuring that it is okay to risk her life and well-being as long as his own safety is not jeopardized. Although family is the thing which Walt uses as a reason for many of his actions throughout the show, we are provided with several examples of how this term becomes even more abstracted and disconnected from the actual essence of family. After Skylar has been involved in sending Ted to the hospital, we see how she is having a difficult time dealing, as this is the first time that she has been involved in hurting anybody in a physical way. Walt attempts to calm her down by saying that things will eventually pass and that it will get easier. He then says,
And when we do what we do for good reasons, then we've got nothing to worry about. And there's no better reason than family.
Walt immediately connects the idea of good reasons with the idea of family, without even considering how these things don't always go together. It seems that Walt has gotten used to using the idea of family as the excuse for his behaviors, and now he is telling Skylar to do the same. 2 episodes later, Skylar is pleading to take the kids out of the house and begins talking about her guilt regarding Ted. Although she is trying to feel her feelings and not gloss over things, Walt has become unaccustomed to this process and tells her that the things she did were for the family. He says that it doesn't make her a bad person, it just makes her a human being. These are most likely the types of excuses Walt has been providing for himself for some time now, and he is instructing Skylar to follow suit once again. But she sees through this facade and replies,
Stop. I don't need to hear any of your bullshit rationales. I'm in it now. I'm compromised, but I will not have my children living in a house where dealing drugs and hurting people and killing people is shrugged off as shit happens.
Once again, she is seeing the situation for what it actually is, and is calling out Walt on his haphazard ways of hurting people without any remorse. Following the murder of Drew Sharp, we see a good example of how Jesse handles the death more head-on, whereas Walt continues to distance himself from feelings. After seeing a news report about the killing, Jesse is highly distraught and overcome with guilt. Walt tries to sympathize with Jesse and says that he hasn't slept for the last few nights, but we can tell by the way Walt says it, with a flat and unsympathetic tone, that these are just words which have no meaning behind them. He then immediately follows with,
And in a year and a half, once we've cooked through this methylamine and made our money, there will be plenty of time for soul searching. Until then, we keep going.
Walt doesn't want to recognize the gravity of the situation, in that they have lowered themselves to the point of killing an innocent child due to their meth business. He is only looking forward to the future, assuming that things will stabilize once they make more money. He is continuing to focus on intellectual ideas as opposed to the grave present reality. Jesse seems to believe Walt for a minute, but when Jesse hears Walt whistling to himself as Jesse is leaving, he has the suspicion that Walt is lying again. In the next episode, Jesse has decided to stop cooking, and Walt wants to reel him back in. When Walt makes another statement about being upset about the boy's murder, Jesse questions things this time, and Walt responds by saying,
Jesus. I mean, I'm the one who's the father here. What, do I have to curl up in a ball in tears in front of you? Do I have to lock myself away in a room and get high to prove it to you? What happened to that boy is a tragedy.
All of the things he is saying make perfect logical sense. He doesn't need to cry his eyes out, and perhaps because he is a father, that may be a reason for him to be more empathetic. But the problem is that these are purely just reasons and forms of logic, and at this point, Walt's rationalizing has become a force of habit, which allows him to not have to experience any emotion whatsoever regarding his involvement in these heinous acts. As the season progresses and Skylar infers through information that Jesse attempted to burn down their house, she is asking Walt questions about the seriousness of things. Walt tries to minimize the events and states that Jesse may have wanted to burn down the house, but that he obviously changed his mind. But Skylar is not buying it, and she asks what he's going to do about it. Walt contends that he will talk to Jesse and make him see reason. As in other situations, it seems like Walt is often able to provide rational and plainly worded statements that conceal his underlying intentions. Perhaps Walt is often not aware of what he will do until he does it, which is why he often seems to make disastrous choices in the moment. But Skylar is able to see through his words as usual, and makes it clear that he is using euphemisms regarding his actual intent to kill Jesse. Walt attempts to plead ignorance, but starts to become somewhat emotional when confronted with this idea. It seems that Walt's unconscious motivations are starting to creep into his consciousness during this scene. He is having a difficult time demarcating between what he has convinced himself of consciously and what is being formulated in the recesses of his mind. We then see the full dismantling and collision of Walt's conscious and unconscious worlds in one of the final episodes of the series, and the scene where everyone is in the desert and Hank is about to be killed by Todd's crew. Walt is pleading with Jack to not kill Hank. He tells them that they can take $80 million and go anywhere in the world, but he is still under the impression that logical explanations can solve his problems and free Hank. Hank is then executed, and we see Walt's emotional response to the act. The outpouring of emotion occurs not only because his brother-in-law is killed in front of him, but also because his rationalizations are finally failing, proving that logic can no longer solve his problems. For one of the few times in the show, his reasoning blows up in his face, finally exposing the weakness of his psychological defenses. Walt is forced to view the murder with his own eyes, not allowing him the ability to distance himself from the event and its related emotions. It seems that the shock of the situation, as well as past traumas, may seem to force their way back into his mind at this time. Then, later in the episode, Walt has gone home and is attempting to pack his family stuff and get them out of town. Skylar wants to know what happened to Hank, and Walt is still trying to sidestep things by saying he negotiated with Hank so as not to be arrested. He tells them that all they have to do is leave, but when they learn about Hank's death, they are both devastated and shocked. Walt tells them that everything is going to be okay, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Walt is still not willing to own anything he has done, but at the same time, he is not able to make rationalizations like he is used to, as his emotions are starting to cause extreme distress. Skylar eventually has had enough, and they get into an altercation in which Skylar slashes Walt with a kitchen knife. Flynn also tries to fend off Walt, and Walt responds by yelling at them.
What the hell is wrong with you? We're a family!
And at that moment, we see what Walt sees, which is his son and wife cowering on the floor in fear, covered in blood, with the baby crying in the background. The reaction from Walt says it all. The idea of family that has become so abstracted and disconnected from the real thing is being matched with an image that speaks to the complete opposite of what family means. The disparity between the idea and the image is too great at this point, and Walt is no longer able to tolerate the dissonance between the idea he has built up in his head and what is right in front of his face. This leads to the end of their family as they know it, and the end of Walt's life as we know it. The rationalizations that served him well for so long came crumbling down in the end, along with the empire he built. Despite the ability to lie to himself and others for so long, it was only a matter of time before the defenses he built up were liable to fall. This concludes this installment on the series on Breaking Bad. Please watch my other videos on other TV and film characters if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.